Minister on presenting her sixth budget. And every year we have a lot of expectations from her because India is no more insulated. It's a big global player over the last few decades. So everything that impacts globally impacts our country as well. So while we are talking about India, which she also, I think, mentioned in her budget speech, that even repercussions globally that is happening, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in South America, clearly is eventually going to affect our country as well. But I would like to make a small point before I get into the union budget, is that this is one more year after them making them a union territory against their wish, is we are passing Jammu Kashmir's territory bill and their demands of grants. Mr. Amit Shah ji, the Honorable Home Minister, had committed to this House that within a year they will hold elections and there will be, the budget of the state will be discussed in their assembly. So I take this opportunity and request the Treasury benches to keep their word, and I hope next year elections are held in Jammu Kashmir and they pass their own budget in their own state. So I think this is a very important point and it must be done because if you can hold national elections, parliamentary elections are held in Jammu Kashmir, why aren't assembly elections? And anyway, you have committed to the court that by September they are supposed to hold the elections this year. So I don't know why we are doing the whole election of 24 and 25, but even if you are doing the budget, I request with full compassion and empathy for people of Jammu Kashmir. They deserve to make their own decisions for themselves. Well, the four engines of growth, sir, for a robust economy are investment, consumption, exports, and fiscal deficit. If you study the entire budget for the last decade of this entire government, I don't want to be a prisoner of the past and the history as the debate is going on from the Treasury bench, because actually I was disappointed with the Treasury bench today. We are used to such wonderful speeches even if they were opponents. And I miss most of them today, because today I think they probably had very less to say in their budget, because the Treasury bench only spoke about things which have happened 50 years ago. People have apologized and moved on. It has nothing to do with our economy and the future of this country or the growth of this country. So I want to speak only about the budget today, and I want to limit my entire speech to that. Sir, if you look at investments itself, now how much investments have come into this country? What was the idea of the investment and reducing the corporate tax? They reduced the corporate tax under the pretext, or maybe they thought it was a wonderful decision at their level, that you reduce the corporate tax so that more investments come. But that is not reflecting in the numbers that the government has given. The gross fixed capital formation of the percentage of GDP, if you look at it, in 2013-14 was 30.70, while if you look at 23-24, it is 30.80. So the reduction bringing in GST, I'm not saying they have made a lot of effort. I won't say governance is continuity. I'm not taking away from the fact that this government has done nothing in 10 years. Well, GST was the Congress's bill, which they implemented. We may have differences in the way they have implemented. It was a good effort. Digitalization, what they have done in banking, I'm not taking away from the credit. But at the same time, was it too little, too late to reduce corporate tax? Is that one reason why investments are not coming? And I think the government needs to even introspect that why investment, the environment is not as good as it should be. Consumption, sir. Consumption is clearly not doing well, especially the agrarian crisis and the rural economy. And data speaks for itself louder than you and me arguing about it. I'm not running the government down, but they need to accept that there is an agrarian crisis in this country. A new word, which I also have learned over the last few years, is shrinkflation. Sir, if you go into FMGCs, you will notice that all these big FMGCs have started a new product line, which is actually called, what is shrinkflation? Is shrinking, showing the inflation and shrinking. So if the biscuit is for 5 rupees, there were 5 biscuits in it. Now there are 4. The size of the biscuit the packaging has become less. You look at any big company, be it Levers, be it Godrej, all the big boys, they have started this new concept of shrinkflation. And this government is denying the fact that there is a price rise. There is where is this shrinkflation coming from? It's a completely new concept in economics. But it's a marketing activity for all these big companies which directly impact jobs, the economy, and it's reflecting. It's a reflection, no? When FMGCs don't do well, data speaks for itself, sir. Exports. Now, everybody looked when there was a global issue with China. Everybody looked at it as China +1. So there was a great opportunity for India to become the +1. Has India truly become Atmanirbhar Bharat? Make in India, all wonderful sloganeering, but has it really converted into jobs? So if it's China +1, what number are we globally? China +1 has become Mexico. China +1 has become Vietnam. China +1 has become Indonesia. We are at number 4 globally, sir. So with China +1, we haven't done as well as we should have done. And this was the sloganeering of this government when they had a clear mandate. They had a 300 MLA. They could have done anything they wanted. So what went wrong in Make in India? I think we all need to introspect of policies. What is just not no point changing policies. Change is inevitable in any economy. We understand that. Third, fourth is fiscal spending. Now, in fiscal spending, what is important is yes, after the global issues, the slowing down after the pandemic, well, India has recovered in the K-shaped. Which it has, we will give credit. But who has really done well? I mean, the Honorable Finance Minister constantly spoke about fiscal deficit. Sir, the FRBM Act, which was a wonderful bill, even if the BJP and under the leadership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, the act came, the UPA continued it because governance is continuity. It was a very good bill, we continued it, 3% for the states, and we should not cross 5% for the country. Yesterday, the Honorable Finance Minister said that 4.9 is what they're plugging at. Is it really going to stop at 4.9? Because my concern is once the supplementary demands come, I'm putting a number. I'm not saying my number is perfect, but I'm not a finance expert, nor am I an economist. But from whatever little that I read, it will probably go up to 5.6 is what is the rough estimate. Now, if the fiscal deficit goes, then what is this? What did we bring this law for? Should there be no good practices and other states also following the same? Just now the Andhra, the gentleman spoke about it, Bharat, right? Bharat spoke about it and he said in Andhra, they don't have money and their chief minister, who's such a learned man, is going to take 2 months to find out where is their fiscal deficit at. Well, my state is not far away from that either, but I will come to that. But I want a clarification from this government for my understanding and for the country to know that if the FRBM Act, you're saying you're at 4.9, well, the data doesn't say so. You know where they have really reached at 4.9 is not the great policies of this government. That time
4.5.
They are saying 4.5 at the cost of who? How are you reaching that 4 number? Because this is not the policies, then Modi government and now NDA government as they call themselves. But the Modi government has survived this whole thing not because of the great work they have done. It's the hard work that this nation and the people of this country have done, and the credit goes to the RBI. Actually, with this whole, or the entire house should thank the RBI and the Governor Shri Shaktikant Das, who gave them a dividend of 2 lakh crores. That's why they are at 4.9. Otherwise, they would not have been at 4.9. So this is something very important. I think we should really thank the RBI, who's done a wonderful job and actually saved this government. It is not their credit. It is the RBI's credit and the right and good policies that they have managed to come here even at 240. Otherwise, they would have not reached there, sir. Another question, which my colleague Dayanidhi Moran very rightly put up, is about the census. When are we going to reach? I don't see anything about the census in this entire budget. Now, 2-3 questions I want to ask them, very pointed. I'm not criticizing them, I'm just asking them. Sir, they talked about women and how much more they want to do and how they've got the women reservation bill, which is still not implemented. But unless you do the census, how are you going to implement the bill is my first question. Second, delimitation. Our constituencies are huge, sir. 23 lakhs, 24 lakhs. When I started, there were 14-15 lakhs voters. Now it's 23, and what are we getting for the money we are getting is 5 crores. In Maharashtra, one MLA gets 5 crores per year. Here, 5 crores per MLA when I have 6. So actually it's equivalent to 30 crores. So the 6 crores per MLA, we are getting 5. So unless you do this delimitation, how are we going to manage through? So is the government thinking of doing this, and where's the funding for it? And the other point is MP lads. Either you increase them or stop them. Because scrap it either or make them shift. Sir, because what is an MP doing? So what are we achieving? My MLA gets for 5 crores. I am also getting 5 crores. His is 3. Today, 15. So what are we achieving? 30. So you are saying increase it to 15. We get 5, they get 15. So now every state varies. So why don't you increase this, sir? That is one very important question. So what it is about the fiscal deficit, I want a clear answer from this government. About the caste census, we definitely want to ask. They talk about just 2-3 very important points. I'll make it as short. I know my colleague is going to speak. Sir, in GST, everything you ask this government, they said the GST Council will decide. I want to ask 2 very small questions to the Honorable Finance Minister. That the Income Tax Department has unearthed one huge fake money changing. There are companies which have input tax credit. Now, input tax credit under the goods and services tax, it's like some thousands of crores of a scam. Now, what has this government done to make sure such scams don't happen? What are the checks and balances? Anything you ask this government, they will say, oh, it goes to GST Council. Now, I have a problem in my state, sir. Your state, you may not have that problem because I don't know what your finance minister does. But unfortunately, in Maharashtra, our finance minister, which data says, never attends the GST Council meeting. So my state is always unheard. So what is the plan B for it? If a finance minister does not attend GST Council meetings, Maharashtra is never heard.
Change the government.
So I want some justice for that and a solution for that. Because besides the finance minister, nobody can speak in that meeting. But he's your ally, so you'll have to tell him that.
Chair.
So that's one very important thing. Sir, the other very important scheme which I want to ask, since it's short of time, I will leave 1 or 2 important things, but I want to ask one pointed question because it's really important. They keep talking, which even Dayanidhi Maran talked about employment. And I think the whole thrust of this government was skilling and employment. I want to ask them, they started a very good scheme. I'm not taking away from the intention of this government. Was production linked, which is a PLI scheme, production linked incentive. Now, if it's a production linked incentive this government has given, if I stand corrected here, Raghuram Rajanji had said that there was some company in Gujarat which they gave, some semiconductor company, which 2.3 crores was the incentive given, is the kind of money we have paid. The employees are paying, that's the level they were given. But no outcome, and not only that, one of the cabinet ministers has agreed that number. I don't know who, I don't want to name anybody. But he said that for the incentive that we have given that government, for that particular unit in Gujarat, it's 2.31 crores per job, per employee. Now, if this is the PLI scheme, is this what you thought of giving in this government? Is this how you're going to create jobs? And now the new one is employment linked incentive. So your PLI has already failed. Now is this ELI is also going to fail? You've already failed even in fiscal deficit. Thanks to the RBI you are safe. So where is really this economy going? What are the, just by making all these announcements and giving all these schemes, there is nothing that you are quantifying, sir, in this economy. The numbers are not helping for what they are saying in these various schemes. They are very proud of feeding 80 crore people. I am also very happy if they are feeding 80 crore people. But how come when they keep saying this multi-dimensional poverty index that this government talks about, every time they are saying we are getting people out of poverty, how come you are still after 10 years feeding 80 crore people? I mean, it's the same number. 10 years, sir, 80 crore logon ko, they are so proud to say they are feeding them and we are feeding them. I'm very happy if they are feeding them. Then how come nobody is going? Then this whole multi-dimensional poverty act, what is this for? They are doing nothing for EPS 95. So much they talked about pensions. EPS 95 was a commitment this government made. I hope his soul rests in peace, but Arunji is unfortunately no more with us. But Arunji had mentioned it, that EPS 95 is something we commit to. This government hasn't done it. Agrarian crisis, as I said, milk, the commerce minister is unfortunately not here. Somebody was saying, oh, that Viplav, I don't know if he's still here. He's here. He was talking about milk production, wheat production. This is data from 10 years. There is no great innovation. And what have they done with milk prices? With exports, casein, onion, they lost 2 seats in Maharashtra only because of banning this onion. Their allies are begging them. to allow onion exports. Nothing they have done. Even after losing 2-3 seats and after doing miserably, they have still not done, which is fine because then it helps us in the state. So it's okay. Once we come to government, we will make sure all agrarian and the farmer is respected, not just by hands me down and ravdies as their favorite word is, but respectfully give MSPs to our farmers. It's their hard work that we are paying for. So I request this government, because according to last, very small sir, according to the percentage of the GDP in agriculture, what is this budget is the increase over last 10 decades is only by not even 1%. In agriculture, it was 3.52, now it's only become 4.2. In health, from 1.15% of the GDP, it has gone to 1.85. Education, 1.8 has only become 3%. Infrastructure, their favorite, sir. Infrastructure, even in Maharashtra, they like only big ticket projects. They only work for infrastructure, and you know obviously why. So budget of 3. Then social justice is 1.5, is also not some great thing. So, sir, I just need to ask this government that they have to clearly in the reply give us what is the plan of this government, because I am as concerned as Andhra, because they have just come to power and they are suffering, as they are saying. Same thing in Maharashtra. Every time there is no fiscal management in that state. So then why did we pass that bill? If there is no good discipline of finances, sir, this country will, unfortunately, I with pain say this, would be a complete economical crisis. We don't want to go our neighbor's way. We want to be firm and committed to a robust country with good growth, with very good fiscal management, and a strict one. So I urge this government to kindly reply to all these questions and reassure us that I have no problem with what they've given to Andhra and Bihar, but please don't give us step treatment because of what the voters have decided, because this is a constitution. Elections have to be fair and just.
Thank you. You made your point. Thank you.
Thank you,
made
sir.
your point. There is Sasi Tharoor. Sasi Tharoor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, sir, for giving me an opportunity to add my voice to the Indian National Congress's view of the Union budget presented by the Honourable Finance Minister. Mr. Chairman, sir, this underwhelming budget has been a woefully missed opportunity. For after all, this was the government's chance to prove to the citizens of India, after the colossal setback the BJP suffered in the recently concluded general election, that the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have actually listened to the concerns of the people. But once again, they've let the people of India down. The budget is in many ways an emblem of this government's economic mismanagement and financial recklessness, made all the more worse by its divisive policies. This budget makes it abundantly clear that the BJP has run out of ideas. Rather than being a vision statement of the economic future of the country, this budget is an illustration, as has been pointed out by many, of their politics. Their priorities chiefly revolve around appeasing their 2 regional allies, forgetting there are 26 other states and 8 union territories whose people have nothing to be happy about. But even out of those 2, the people of Andhra Pradesh have much less reason to be happy at the supposed allocations made to their state in the budget. The budget only commits to arranging 15,000 crores towards the development of Amravati. This is not an allocation. It merely entails the facilitation of loans by the centre from multilateral development organizations to your state. Instead of amounting to a form of financial support from the centre, this commitment will only add to Andhra's existing debt burden. The other promises made, of course, are the very ones broken in the NDA's first term. One only hopes that another no-confidence motion will not again have to follow. Now, 4 other states have received the government support for natural calamities, all NDA rule states, Bihar, Assam, Sikkim and Uttarakhand. On the other hand, India alliance states find themselves cast out and ignored. Indeed, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, as well as my home state of Kerala, have time and again sought funds for natural calamities, from cyclones to rapid coastal erosion, and they've got none. Bihar received 26,000 crores for its highways, but Karnataka had sought and got nothing for the critical road infrastructure projects in Bangalore. For the government of India, it seems some states are more equal than others. Now, this inclination to bias is not limited to state allocations either. If one looks at the specific concessions on basic customs duty given to 3 cancer drugs, it turns out they're all made by the same pharmaceutical company. Why were various other costly life-saving drugs being imported into the country overlooked for this exemption? On that subject, Mr. Chair, I find it worrying that the government has completely disregarded the augmentation of existing healthcare infrastructure. In my own state of Kerala, many were hoping to hear a mention of the long proposed aims in Kerala. Alas, even with the presence of 2 ministers of state from Kerala, the government has continued to disappoint us. Bias, Mr. Chairman, takes many forms. This budget fails to consider that in our country today, private investment is sputtering, consumption growth is slow, real rural wages are plummeting, overall wages are in decline, and demand for investment credit has collapsed. As a result, returns on labor are low, and so are returns on debt capital. Only equity and private profits are booming. The situation is perverse, sir. Luxury watches, premium cars, and business class travel are reporting huge increases in sales and net profits. But the purchases of ordinary people have plunged. बनियन गेंजी खरीदने के लिए लोगों के पास पैसे नहीं है. But SUV sales are rising, and small car and two-wheeler sales are tanking. It is starkly clear why inequality in India today is said to be worse than during the British Raj. Even when all the flaws that beset a developing country, ill health, poor education, abysmal housing, poor sanitation, malnutrition, infant mortality, all linger in India, a multi-billionaire can preside over an obscenely extravagant wedding, reportedly spending 5,000 crores, while in the sprawling slums of the same city, most Indians struggle to survive on less than 200 rupees a day. This government does not frame its policies with those 200 rupees a day people in mind. Instead, it gives tax breaks to favored capitalists and corporates in the name of boosting private investment. But in fact, this government's corporate tax cuts have meant a revenue loss over the last 5 years of an astronomical 8.7 lakh crore rupees foregone by the government. Who has this benefited, Mr. Chairman? Can you tell us where the jobs are, Madam Finance Minister? Where is the capital investment? While no one, Mr. Speaker, expected any better from this government, it's extraordinary that in India, individuals pay more direct tax than corporates. Budgeted figures of higher direct taxes from individuals and lower from corporates will surprise voters and should shame the government. Perhaps they are ashamed since they've stopped even releasing detailed GST revenue collection data, allegedly because their GST collections are so high that they dare not reveal the extent to which the Aam Aadmi is subsidizing this government through regular purchases that they pay GST on, while the government subsidizes a favored few. But once again, concealing data is a specialty of this government. Remember the PM CARES Fund. During the UPA years, Mr. Chairman, personal income tax was 21% of total tax collection, corporate tax was 35%. Today, the share of corporate taxes out of total tax collection is the lowest level ever at just 26%, while the share of personal income tax in total tax collections has increased to 28%. But while this has gone on, private investment has nosedived from a peak of 35% of GDP under Dr. Manmohan Singh to below 29% during this government's 10 years of BJP rule. So the corporate tax cut has put over 8.7 lakh crores in the pockets of billionaires, while the middle class and the Aam Aadmi continue to bear the weight of heavy taxation. In contrast, if the money were to be put into the hands of ordinary people, they would spend it in their local communities and on their own essentials, and so stimulate the economy. It would be a matter of spending on roti, kapda or makan rather than on the pockets of those who happen to support the BJP. So I want to point out to the Honourable Finance Minister, in her absence, of course, that 1/3 of our population lives under 100 rupees a day. And if we are to have a budget that addresses their needs, we must pay attention to those crucial sectors of our economy that are conspicuous in their absence from this budget. My colleague Kumari Shelja has already addressed the emissions and agriculture, so in the interest of time, I won't touch that and farmers' welfare. But consider, for instance, that the word health is mentioned only 4 times in the speech. Indeed, Madam Minister did not even discuss healthcare at length. At a time in India when 55 million of our most vulnerable citizens are annually cast below the poverty line because of having to spend on healthcare, this budget offers nothing tangible for this vital sector. Was it really so long ago, Mr. Chairman, that COVID-19 rampaged through across the world, wreaking havoc and exposing our massively inadequate and ineffective healthcare sector? Yes, if one were to look at the budget, it would seem that the pandemic has been forgotten. For allocations, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare have decreased as a share of the overall expenditure from 2.16% in 2019 to 1.9% in the budget. At the same time, the Ministry of Ayush has had an allocation nearly doubling. The fact is that India is just not spending enough on health. Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, the other BRICS countries spend roughly 14 to 15 times more than us. Until recently, even Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives were outspending us. This year, the budget outlay for health has seen a minuscule rise, yet far from the aspiration of 5% of the GDP, the Modi government's health expenditure as a proportion of GDP remains stagnant. And we are even distant from spending the minimum 2.5% that was outlined by their government in the National Health Policy. We also must address the so-called missing middle. According to Niti Aayog, these are the people who have no health insurance cover and are too well off to be eligible for the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. When flagged in a 2021 Niti Aayog report, the government said they would take notice of this, and yet here we are in 2024 with no health solution at all for this middle class. This is highly irresponsible and reflective of our government's inability to afford something as basic as healthcare insurance cover to some of our neediest citizens. Offering health insurance to employees at negotiated rates, reducing GST on health insurance premiums, offering such tax benefits as increased exemption limits under Section 80D of the Income Tax Act, could all have been ideas for the Finance Minister to make health insurance far more affordable and accessible, especially for the middle section, the missing middle of our population, which is growing according to the government, but she has completely overlooked them. The truth is, Mr. Chairman, that even when it comes to a sector as indispensable as public health care, the mantra of the BJP, as with everything else, has been rebrand, not revamp. And so you've had India's health and wellness centers, which need more funds and more staff to provide cost-effective treatment to ordinary Indians, regardless of their faith, being renamed Ayushman Arogya Mandirs, casting a secular institution of a secular nation into an overtly religious mold. But perhaps a certain constituency in Uttar Pradesh should have taught the BJP never again to exploit a mandir for scoring political goals. Yet rebranding is what this government has done for the last 10 years. We've been calling it a name-changing government, not a game-changing government, as you know. But honestly, hearing the inflated claims of the ruling party after this weak budget and all the TV shows I had to appear on yesterday, I am reminded of a garage mechanic saying to the owner of a car, हम आपके brakes तो ठीक नहीं कर सके, इसलिए horn की आवाज़ को बढ़ा दिया. That's what the Sarkar is doing. The brakes of the Indian economy have fallen out, but this government's horn keeps getting louder. Let's look at the targets announced for Make in India in its 10 years of existence. An underachievement. This government thinks honestly that rhetoric is a substitute for action. But if I may move to another sector of the economy which the budget barely pays any attention to, that's education, immensely critical to employment generation. For all the BJP's talk of upskilling youth and equipping them with the tools they need to procure jobs in today's intensely competitive job market, there was no mention in the budget speech of primary or higher education. We have a staggering 3.5 million youngsters, 35 lakhs, dropped out of school in the last academic year for which there are records. And this is not just an indication of economic failure by the government, kids having to join the informal workforce to support their families. But it's the future of India stepping away from the path of knowledge, Mr. Chairman. It's deeply unfortunate. And while leaving school may not be in these students' hands, getting them back to school is certainly in the government's hands. So it's a shame that access to quality and compulsory education has been wholly overlooked in this budget. Education has been allocated a miserly 1.2 lakh crore rupees, which is a 7% decrease from the revised estimated allocation of 23-24. More alarming is the fact that the allocation for the Department of School Education and Literacy as a share of the total budget outlay reduced from 3.16% in 2013-14, the last year that we were in government, when the UPA was there, to just 1.53% in 24-25. And the combined allocations for both the departments have declined from 4.7% as a share of the total budget expenditure in our last year to 2.53% in your so far last year. Now, as a share of GDP, it's even worse. It's a horrifically low 0.36%. The government's own new education policy of 2020 recommends that the education budget should be 6% of GDP. Now, Mr. Chairman, if this Modi government cannot even meet the goals that they set for themselves, then what can we expect of them, Mr. Chairman? In continuance of their onslaught in education, by the way, the budget has slashed the funding for the UGC by 60%. Sir, my party has allocated 20 minutes to me, sir. So I have another 6 or 7 to go.
You are having 15 members.
No, sir, I've been told 20, and I've prepared accordingly, please. But they've slashed the UGC budget by 60%, and fears do abound now that this will reduce the UGC to purely a regulatory agency, encourage universities to start more self-financing courses, creating an additional financial burden on students, and will also make more universities dependent on loans from the Higher Education Financing Agency, a complete transformation in our education environment. On top of that, in 2019, the government introduced a 4% education and health cess, which is not a sustainable source of revenue for the government, but this cess has financed 70% of total educational expenditure after 2015. So that is another source of worry. So there's little to cheer on health and education, but should we welcome the government's belated recognition of the worst ever employment crisis in our country in history by their borrowing the Congress Party's proposed apprenticeship scheme and renaming it? No. First, because the exaggerated claims of the government that it added 125 million jobs in its 10 years, including 47 million last year, are completely fake. They include unpaid labor, and even 1 hour's work a week has been counted as a job. Second, because they've diluted our scheme. We had proposed an apprenticeship which would lead to jobs. They've reduced that to an internship, which is only assistance. They've only restricted to 500 top companies. We had it open-ended. We offered 1 lakh per person. They're offering only 5,000 rupees a month. And on top of that, they're saying 10% from CSR funds. CSR funds are meant for social welfare benefits and not for the companies to spend on themselves. So I have to say, on top of that, you have the fine print in the annexure that says that the participation in these companies is voluntary. I don't know how they're going to define the 500 top companies, and how would these companies voluntarily shoulder the government's burden of creating an economy where there are enough jobs. The precedents are not encouraging. Can the government tell us what became of their 10 years of skill development efforts? How many of those trained have been placed in real jobs? What about the schemes for women? Why is female labor force participation at a record low today of 28%? मगर चलिए सभापति जी, बहुमत हारने के बाद बीजेपी तो हमारे सुझाव मानने लगी, ये तो अच्छी बात है अगर इससे भारत की भलाई हो जाएगी. But it's amusing to me that the BJP had to lose its majority in parliament before they became receptive to effective suggestions from the opposition. Let me immodestly point out that it was I who in the Lok Sabha on 10th of March 2016 asked the late Finance Minister Shri Arun Jaitley to reduce or remove angel tax in order to strengthen the startup ecosystem. And I'm glad to see that 8 years later, a finance minister has heeded my words and abolished it. So, chalo der aaye, durust aaye. But I have to say that the finance minister's rosy claims on FDI are belied by facts. FDI as a ratio of GDP has in fact collapsed from an average 2% of GDP to 0.5% of GDP last year, the lowest in a decade. One big reason for stunted private investment is the heightened risk perception of the Indian economy. Foreign companies actually pulling money out of our country. Some $44.4 billion have been pulled out in 23-24. And actual FDI, that is investments minus what they take out, has fallen to 26 billion, which is a 37% drop, according to RBI data, and the lowest number since 2006-07, when the UPA was in power. Similarly, the government's disservice of removing indexation benefits under the long-term capital gains tax is unforgivable, because countless members of the middle class worked tirelessly for years to be able to afford a house or make an investment in real estate to secure a pakka house for their families, and it's no longer a viable investment because you no longer can index the appreciation of that value to inflation, and you will pay a much larger sum as a result. In this example, a couple of minutes more, sir. In this example, we are looking at the government taking more taxes out of the pockets of the middle class, out of people who might even end up losing money in the course of buying and selling a property, which may be the only one that they can afford. So the real worry with all of this is that you're going to see a strong resurgence of cash transactions in purchases of property. It'll bring the real estate economy back into the deadly fold of black money. So much for na khaunga, na khane dunga. I must say, sir, the government keeps boasting of capex and infrastructure, but the fact is that, and it even says it will create jobs in the tourism sector because of this. But the truth is, how can you create jobs or strengthen tourism when your refusal to reduce GST in hotels has made India amongst the costliest destinations?
You exhausted 20 minutes already, please.
Or indeed boost tourism when everything in the infrastructure we're seeing is collapsing. Terminal 1 in Delhi, the roof has collapsed. Rajkot and Jabalpur, the canopies have collapsed. 5 bridges have fallen in Bihar last month. And Mumbai's Trans-Harbour Link, which was inaugurated by the PM in January of this year, has developed cracks. So what the finance minister ought to do is allocate resources to fix our infrastructure rather than boasting about the tourists it will attract. I'm going to wrap up, sir, with just one sad comment further before I conclude, which is the accidents and the failure of the government to implement its own kavach that it's been talking about. We've had grisly and ghastly railway accidents, but the kavach system has only utilized less than half of the money allotted to it in the last budget, and only 1% of the total amount of railway lines that are supposed to have been equipped with kavach have been equipped. So this is pretty shameful, and the budget has glossed over it. Nor did the finance minister mention Manrega, which has been mentioned by others, so I can just say in one sentence that demand keeps going up, but the Modi government keeps reducing its allocations to this. And it's the allocation they've requested now is far short of the amounts requested and required to meet the demands. On top of that, they've deleted job cards. 267% of more job cards have been deleted this year, and the new Aadhaar-based payment system has left 8 million active workers ineligible for payment. This is supposed to be something to help the rural poor. It's actually hurting them, sir. Let me conclude by saying that this budget is a do-nothing, claim-to-do-everything exercise. No matter how much the government ratchets up the mythic vision of a Viksit Bharat and its rhetoric, this is not a budget for a Viksit Bharat. It's a motley collection of schemes without an analytical framework or a coherent spending plan, and no pathway to achieve the boasts and rhetoric of either Amrit Kal or Viksit Bharat. The government is selling us a penthouse in a building whose foundations are shaky, whose canopy has collapsed, whose lift shaft is yet to be installed, and whose workers are starving. The budget lacks originality, ambition, strategy. We get no answers to the employment puzzle. We get no solutions to education and health, and we don't engage with any of the crises of investment I've outlined today. The budget that India needs and India deserves is much more than a statement of solidarity with the ruling party's political allies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mehatab, Honorable Member Mehatab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.